It's natural to have disagreements from time to time. I mean, we're all different people, right? Well, in the world of sports and politics, people can have very different viewpoints, different opinions, different beliefs. We have to agree to disagree from time to time, but that's all right. In the discussion that gets us to that point is where we can truly learn a thing or two. I'm the Sports Professor Rick Horrow, and a civilized debate can do wonders in almost any situation. The key word there, civilized. I'm talking face-to-face, not through a tweet or a text. And I think we might have lost sight of that somewhere along the way. And there are countless issues facing the world today, so why not talk it out? Sports and politics cross paths more than you might think, for both good reasons and bad. The two aren't mutually exclusive, and one can certainly have an effect on the other. That's what this show is here for, to bring those two worlds together on topics that can and will have a lasting impact. Well, politicians are people too, no matter what you might have heard. Yeah, they root for their favorite teams, they have an opinion on the DH, and yes, they pick a side in the LeBron versus MJ debate. But this is a platform for them to express all of that and more. So it's time to reach across the aisle, politicians from all backgrounds talking the stories affecting the sports world today, both big and small, in a civilized but passionate way, starting a dialogue that could change the way business is done in the nation's capital, maybe even the entire country. No pressure, guys. We'll call it honorable. Rhodes Scholar, All-American. You remember him as a Maryland basketball fan. University of Maryland. You played for Buffalo Braves and the Knicks and Atlanta and Washington. In 1987, elected to Congress's 4th District in Maryland through 1993. And in 2011, the inaugural chair of the President's Council on Sports, Physical Fitness, and Nutrition. And the most important fact, I think, for his honor, at 6'11", the tallest member ever elected to Congress, 2 feet 5 inches taller than Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland. Congratulations on the credential, and congratulations on being taller than Barbara Mikulski. Thank you all for that.
It was tough sharing a podium with it.
Congressman Roger Williams, 25th Congressional District, representing Austin since 2013. But probably more to the point here, you were a member of the all-decade team at TCU and All-Southwestern Conference. You told me that you can still hit a curveball and you're pretty fast, and I guess the issue is whether you're faster than me, and I think I know that. But the important thing as well is representing Fort Hood in your district. You've engineered the largest pay raise in 8 years for the troops generally. So clearly you have done some incredible things in your career in Congress, not the least of which is the head of the bipartisan Congressional Baseball Caucus and the coach of the manager, as you said earlier, of the Republican baseball team. And he was born in 1603. He founded Rhode Island. Oh, no, that's another one.
That's right. Yeah, well,
you were the founder of Rhode Island?
I've been a busy guy.
Yeah. Stan Brand, a friend of mine for 900 years. He was general counsel, get this title, to the U.S. House, the chief legal officer to the U.S. House of Representatives, senior counsel at Aiken Gump, but he's also, importantly, the VP of minor league baseball, and probably more important for this particular discussion, a 3-handicap golfer who's actually scratched, but when he's on the golf course, he plays to a 3 because you want to get the advantage as well. Is that accurate?
I can lose a lot of money that way.
Yeah, exactly. Our debut show, we start with gambling, and we'll talk about that generally today. New Jersey in 2018, by the way, about $1.24 billion in sports betting at casinos and racetracks and online. 6 states have it now. 20 or more are going to have it in the future within the next couple of years. People talk about dollars for schools and infrastructure and roads and everywhere else, and others say it leads us down the path of moral decay. What say you, Tom McMillen, is a good public policy?
Well, I was in Congress when we voted for PASPA, which restricted and gambling. And today, I'm a pragmatist. I believe that the world is doing it illegally, and Europe's doing it, and the world's doing it. And I think it's inevitable it would be done in the United States. But I'm concerned. What I work with in the college level, there's a lot of these kids are very vulnerable. And so I would say the short answer is I'm in favor of it, but we ought to be very cautious.
And of course, you have your pulse on it, Congressman, because of the federal implications of all of this. The Supreme Court obviously made it easier to go through the door. And is there a federal stake in this issue? Leave it to the states, try to figure out what the federal regulation might be? Where's that going?
Well, I think politically, the idea is leave it to the states. I mean, the federal government, big brother, everything, leave it to the states. In Texas, where I represent right now, I would say if we voted today, we would not be in favor of it. But you know, you start gambling in sports can take you down a path that I think is a real problem, especially with young people and the bigness of this industry anymore. I have a concern with it, and I do think, though, probably the states should probably decide what they want it to look like.
Well, let's talk about that path for a second, Stan, then we'll get to you about the prop betting, et cetera. The American Gaming Association says that 97% of all sports betting is done illegally. Super Bowl itself, $4.7 billion of betting total, so you got to assume 4.5, 4.6 is illegal. How do you protect, from your perspective, the integrity of the sports as this Pandora's box has been opened?
Well, I think that's what you've got. That's what you've got to look at, and you got to be very careful with it. And what you decide today may not work tomorrow. And in an industry like that, candidly, there's always somebody trying to figure out the loop.
Yeah. And
so you got to be ahead of the game in many cases. Sometimes we're not ahead of the game. So I just have a real concern about it because, you know, I still believe college athletics is about the kids playing for their mama, their daddy, their school, and their girlfriend. And
in that order?
Well, a lot of guys had girlfriends in the front, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I still think it's sad, but I think we have to be very careful.
Yeah. And Stan, from your perspective, recent history, NASCAR just entered into a partnership with a Genius company, I guess that's what they're calling it, but they're allowing prop live mobile bets, not just on who wins the race, but who passes who on what lap and how many laps. And I know it's the same thing from balls and strikes in baseball. What's your thought about live betting, and where do you draw the line?
Well, it's a concern because the integrity of the game is obviously got to be protected. That's the industry we've developed, and the product we have, people expect it to be on the level. And so you have to have some mechanism for ensuring that you're not opening the door to the 1919 Black Sox scandal type situation.
Do we all remember that? By the way, listeners, that was 1919. It's a 100-year anniversary of that, right? It's amazing.
New York gamblers manipulating the World Series.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this goes really deep. I mean, I think, you know, it's either going to be a federal issue or a state issue, okay? Yeah. Colleges are going to have to deal with it, but you can't have different programs. You can't have one college saying one thing and the other saying another. That would be a disaster like we've never seen before. So this is a big question, and it needs to have debate, and needs to have dialogue on how we're doing it, because college athletics is a huge, huge industry in this country, and one that people are very passionate about.
And this involves our universities. I mean, these are not just college sports. Yeah. It's our really important assets in this country. Look around this area right here. Just over the road here, Virginia, you can't gamble. But soon you're going to be able to gamble in Washington, and you'll be able to gamble on your phone in the arena and close to the arena. Maryland will soon, in a few years, have gambling, sports betting. So that's one of the problems having all these different states, is that it becomes a Byzantine process regulating all this.
And attorney, counsel, there's an issue relative to mobile devices, right, across state lines, federal question, but also, I guess, New Jersey has the issue because they were one of the first. And what happens when you cross the Schuylkill and you're in Philly? Well,
right now, under the Wire Act, you have a legal problem, a legal issue. So you have to geolocate these betting venues inside the state. Well, that's not practical in the long term, because you're never going to be able to limit people's betting geolocated.
And I think one of the things that came out of New Jersey is that's the only state that's hitting its revenue projections because of mobile betting. And that leads to prop betting, which are very high-risk bets, which are of concern to college. You know, they're colleges and universities, and very hard to regulate.
Instantaneous enforcement, instantaneous monitoring, very difficult. So before we go to break, you're the sitting congressman, so we're going to put you on the spot. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame?
I think when he passes, he should be.
That is an elected official speaking under 10 seconds in a soundbite, and for that is the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Well, sir, I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the positive and not the negative about this issue.
Coming up, baseball stars on Capitol Hill, a contentious hearing that rocked the sport to its core. But should the government have been involved in the first place? It's all a part of the political game. Be right back.
Let me start by telling you this. I have never used steroids, period.
I have never done steroids, period. That brings back some political examples that we don't have to go anywhere with. I got it. But, the interesting thing is, and Congressman, that's a very interesting perspective. That's a very interesting soundbite. And I understand that Rafael Palmeiro is a loved person in some ways and not a loved person in other ways. What's your thought about that?
Well, I mean, there's no question. You look at his stats; he's Hall of Fame material.
Yeah.
There is no question about it. But he's like some others, got caught up in this steroid issue, and I think Congress overreacted in bringing everybody in. It should have been something maybe baseball dealt with. But as I said, Rafael's still playing. He's playing in Cleburne, Texas, right now for the Cleburne Railroaders.
Before we go any further, Stan, and you got to give us the legal perspective on this. Can you still hit a curveball?
No question about it. If I can recognize it.
Well, I mean, so can everybody else.
A
in the major
curveball
league.
is just a fastball with a curve on it.
Very well done. By the way, that wisdom gets the guy. Is this your fifth term?
Yeah.
Fifth term. That wisdom gets him elected 5 times to the Congress in Texas. Just so you understand, Stan. And by the way, Stan Brand, we talked about his credentials, but he represented Major League Baseball and minor league baseball in connection with the congressional investigation into steroid policies. Give us the overview, and did they get it right?
Well, the overview is that by the time those hearings were held, and while they were of great public interest, the steroid issue had really faded. The steroid era was over because in 2002, the major leagues and the players negotiated for the first time ever a drug testing program. Up until that point, the union wouldn't bargain it. So by the time that hearing clip that you saw was taking place, the use of steroids at major league level by players had dramatically declined.
And a lot of it then is that you would say Congress got involved after the fact?
Well,
is that fair to say?
They did, but one thing that, looking back historically, and it's hard for me as a defense lawyer, but I will, the contribution that was made, it forced Bud Selig, then commissioner, to hire George Mitchell to do a review and to clear the air and take the cloud off baseball and establish once and for all what exactly was the depth of use. And the Mitchell report pretty much put that issue to bed for baseball. So in that sense, I think it was a service.
But that's kind of an indirect service. Tom McMillen, should Congress have stepped in that context?
You have to put this in perspective. The United States is the only major country in the world that does not have a Ministry of Sports where sports policy is set by the federal government. And we rely on a laissez-faire kind of form of governance. And I think that's worked pretty well. But there are times when Congress has stepped in. Title IX, when the federal government stepped in, Title IX has worked well for women. The Amateur Sports Act in the 70s reformed the whole Olympic movement. And I do think that in this gambling area, we're going to need a federal framework for gambling. So there are times when I do think the federal government should step in.
And steroids was an example in history that you thought was one of those times that they should have?
Well, I think the point is, Roger, to what level they should have gone. But I think we're going to see more of this substance issues in sports, and someone's going to have to, be on top of it. There's times where Congress will have to take a look at it.
Set the chronology for us, Stan, again about where baseball made it illegal and what drugs, and then.
One of the pressures that actually was exerted on baseball to change the rules was from the players. because the players saw the competitive advantage that they thought players were getting over them, and that put pressure on them to use. That was the state of affairs in 2002 when they agreed to testing.
And broadly defined, segue a little bit, but not too far, Tom McMillen makes the point about the Amateur Sports Act and Title IX as very important parts of federal intervention that created some positive public policy. Immigration policy relative to athletes, boxing regulation, community trust relative to franchises in locations, public funding of facilities, sports violence. A lot of blowback comes from people who are saying, look, you're spending tax money, you got better things to do, but yet these are issues that someone needs to deal with. Roger, where do you come out on all of that as far as federal intervention in sports generally?
Well, I think the less federal intervention is, you're not going to get away from it. But
right.
the less it is, the better it is. But the thing about it is, sports is such a major component of our country and of our lifestyle right now. We've got to make sure that it's pure, because it's one of the few things people on the weekend can relax and forget some of these issues that we're going through, and to be able to root for your team and be able to hope that this certain player does well is very important. So we got to keep the integrity of sports. And I agree with Tom. You're going to have some federal component and you're going to have some state component, but the sport itself needs to be able to take care of itself and control it.
And you're going to have a collective bargaining component. Mm-hmm. That's actually where the testing regime comes from. It came from the players and the owners in all sports bargaining over that issue.
And the whole idea, again, drugs, but discipline, player discipline, role models. I'm getting into the whole discussion about athletes as role models, but inherently, the structure comes out of collective bargaining, right? I mean, in the first instance as well. So I guess people need to be very careful before they overjudge where the federal government or governments are or not. It's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, you look at America and you realize that we put a lot of resources at the top of the sports pyramid, yeah, and not so much at the bottom. And we ought to be worried about our kids getting fat and not playing sports. And that requires state and federal intervention sometimes. And you know, when you're spending billions of dollars building stadiums, you're not building ballparks for kids. At some point in time as a nation, you got to say, well, is that what we want? And so there are times when the government needs to be involved.
You are uniquely qualified on that one, obviously, besides being closer to God just because you're 7 feet tall. Mm-hmm. But as far as your ethics are concerned, and the inaugural chair of the President's Council on Sports, Physical Fitness and Nutrition, an outgrowth of the old Schreiber, the President's Council, but you combined a whole bunch of stuff relating to youth sports and the quality of life as well. You feel like the momentum has carried on, a lot of work to do.
Well, I don't. I think what Roger would say, we grew up on playgrounds and ballparks. That's how we grew up. Kids today don't have that opportunity. It's so organized, it's so methodical, and the spontaneous play, the idea of going out into a park and playing without worry of danger, those are the times when, as I said, we grew up, and I think in a way we have to be able to restore opportunity for the masses in America, and sometimes that's going to require government involvement.
Palmero, McGuire, Sosa, Bonds. You're a Hall of Fame expert, yes or no? In or out?
Well, I can't tell you right now. Their careers deem that they're in. Yeah. Okay, there's some people think that you should put them all in a group and put them in at one time and get it over with. So I think that's going to be debate. This makes baseball great. Again, we're going to have the debate. Should one be in the Hall of Fame? Should one not? But their numbers, we got to figure out a way to get them in at some point in time because their numbers deem it.
After the break, no time to think. First thing that comes to our mind in our wide-ranging lightning round, this is the political game. Political game continues. I'm Rick Horrow, and we're joined by Tom McMillen, Roger Williams, Stan Brand, and we've got some fun coming up. 2-minute warning until the end of the show, by the way, with our sports theme, but we have the lightning round. We're going to put a 24-second clock on our gentlemen here, and we're going to ask them a question relative to one of the most enduring issues in sports and see what they can tell us. Tom, start with you. You are a basketball guy. You're a purist in some context. You certainly know the game. What do you think of the NBA thinking about instituting a 4-point basket?
I support it.
That's not enough. That's not enough.
Well,
Keep
as a
going.
big guy, I feel that it will marginalize tall players, but I was also a good outside shooter, so I think it would add a whole other element to the game. As I said, I think it would make it more exciting, and a lot of kids will grow up trying to shoot that 4-point shot, so that's aspirational.
And it also aspirational for you, but I've heard that word before. The buzz, but I'm asking this one, okay? I got one more question for you. It opens up the lane for you. Basically,
it does.
as
It
a big
opens
guy.
up, but it really takes away the whole post game in a lot of respects.
In a lot of respects. So, Roger Williams, a baseball guy. Let's remember his credential. He was basically all-world in the Southwestern Conference until he couldn't hit a curveball. DH in both leagues. Should the American League and the National League play by the same set of rules?
Absolutely, and I think the DH should be in both leagues. The DH, you look at, if without the DH, Hank Aaron would not have hit 755 home runs. David Ortiz would not be in the Hall of Fame or going to be in the Hall of Fame. People go to ballparks to see two things: no-hit pitchers and home run hitters. And if you can score more runs, that's what people want to see in this day and time. So the DH has helped a lot of people. Like I say, Aaron Ortiz come to mind. It's lengthened a lot of careers of great players.
Almost under the gun. I can't argue because I owed him time from some of the previous answers before. Stan Brand, this is interesting. You haven't done them because you're not an elected guy, but you've witnessed a number of these political bets where one mayor from a city challenges another mayor from a city. What's the weirdest political bet you've ever seen?
Well, the best one for me was 1983 World Series. Maryland Crabs versus Philadelphia Hoagies. And that was made by a lot of the politicians at the time when I was counsel in the House.
And who delivered and how did they deliver?
Well, the Orioles won.
Yeah, but was it boxes of crabs and boxes of hoagies?
It was blue crabs.
Yeah.
Live blue crabs from the Chesapeake Bay.
Congressman, any ones that you particularly participated in? Have you had any Austin UT? I'm sure you bet with some of your. Excuse me, you had a friendly wager with some of your fellow congressmen.
I don't bet. Remember, I believe the states ought to get
Yeah, I
involved
forgot
with the
about
federal
that.
government.
Right? Let's cut that out, right? Yeah. That's a good answer. Listen, here's the thing that I wanted everybody to emphasize. In these days of political turbulence and people thinking about how to disagree, let's all agree to disagree. And the bottom line of all of this, which is interesting, we have a general counsel who has been a Democratic person all his life, a D and an R. But for the last 22 minutes, you wouldn't know it. And you won't know it. Politicians, as we said, are human too. This is one man's attempt to inject some civility in sports and politics. We will be back, hopefully on a regular basis, to continue to temper the debate and to continue to make the case that the political game is alive and well if people would just listen and agree to disagree. I'm the Sports Professor Rick Horrow. See you soon.